We are continuing on with our NHL offseason plan series. Today we're taking a look at the 29th place team from the regular season, the New Jersey Devils. What should we expect from them this offseason? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today we're continuing on with our NHL offseason plan series, where we're going to look at all 31 NHL teams and take a look at what they have coming up this offseason, what we should expect. We're going to take a look at the Devils' regular season stats, have a quick snapshot of how things went. We're going to take a look at their salary cap space. What do they have for expiring contracts, RFAs, UFAs, and then our final segment is the 5 burning questions that need to be answered for this team during the offseason. So what kind of moves should we expect as well? So let's get started here. First up, we're taking a look at the regular season for New Jersey. Obviously, if they're the 29th base team, we know things didn't go overly well, but let's take a look at the breakdown here of their team statistics. So the Devils finished with a 19-30-7 record for 45 points. So that's obviously not very good. Some major steps need to be taken to get this team being more competitive. They finished with a minus 49 goal differential. So way too many goals going in compared to goals being scored. Now, looking at their special teams, they were both pretty bad on both sides of the game here. In the power play, they only converted on 14.2% of their power plays for 28th best in the NHL. And their PK was the absolute worst. 31st overall, only 71% success rate. So clearly, things were not good on special teams. They don't score enough. They give up way too many goals. There's really a lot of areas here that need to be worked on, and a lot of this is going to be growing pains as this team really starts to rely more and more heavily on their young core here. Now, heading into next year, they have all kinds of salary cap room with $37 million in space, but of course, as you'll see here shortly as well, there's a fair bit of expiring contracts that'll need to be signed, but still, nothing that's going to be too outrageously expensive, so they still have lots of room should they decide that they want to go out and either go into free agency, or if they are able to make some trades to bring in any other larger contracts, they certainly have that ability to do so. And of course, the other big thing with the Devils as well is they have 2 first-round picks heading into this summer's 2021 NHL Draft. Of course, they have their own pick, which should be pretty high. Obviously, being the third from the bottom, they're guaranteed to pick somewhere between 3, 4, or 5 overall. So, I mean, they're looking at either getting a top defenseman, which they could really use. Maybe they'll be lucky and get like Jack Hughes' brother, Luke Hughes. That's a real possibility. They'd love to do that. Or if he's already gone, maybe they can grab a top forward, for example, like a Matt Beniers. You just never know. Maybe another defenseman like a Brent Clark. It really depends on who's on the board and where exactly they slot. But they also have the first-round pick from the New York Islanders that they picked up in the trade that sent Kyle Palmieri and Travis Zajac to the Islanders at the NHL trade deadline. So having that extra first-round pick should hopefully help them get another decent prospect, or it's something that they could consider using as trade bait as they get closer to the draft as well, if they have an opportunity to pick up a player who can help them right away. We've just discussed that the Devils have tons of cap space, but what contracts are coming up and need to be either signed or replaced for this team? Let's now take a look at the breakdown of restricted free agents as well as unrestricted free agents who they could lose to free agency. Now, on the RFA side of things, they have a decent sized list here, but like I said, nothing that's going to cost them a whole ton of money. Most of these guys, if the Devils wish to retain them, can be signed for nothing much more than they were making on their ELCs, or maybe some minor raises here. You've got Michael McLeod, Nick Merkley, Yanni Kukkonen, you got Yegor Sharagovich, Nathan Bastian, and Jonas Siegenthaler. Now, like I said, none of these guys were making big money, so to re-sign them is not going to be outrageous. They could decide to keep pretty well. Most of them, I would suspect, will get a qualifying offer, and like I said, they can retain them without breaking the bank. On the UFA side, it's debatable, really, if any of these players will be back. We get Ryan Murray, who they had picked up from Columbus. Murray's often injured. Obviously, he's at later stages of his career. It's hard to say how long he'll play because the injuries have taken such a toll. But really, overall, he could still go for a while yet based on age. But I don't know where things are at with him otherwise. But he likely doesn't return. You get Connor Carrick. I imagine he's gone too. Matt Tennyson, maybe, but probably gone. And goaltenders Aaron Dell and Scott Wedgwood. Things for Dell during his brief appearances didn't go well. I could see maybe Scott Wedgwood being considered for the backup role to Mackenzie Blackwood. That is a possibility here, but Wedgwood did have a few opportunities to play this year and did okay considering the team in front of him. I could see a scenario that they maybe give him a short-term one-year deal or something. I mean, that's his second stint with the Devils as well, so certainly a player that the team is quite familiar with, but that's certainly going to be something we discuss here in our next segment as well. So looking at the 5 burning questions facing the New Jersey Devils heading into the 2021 NHL offseason. To me, one big question is the future of $9 million defenseman PK Subban. He's heading into the final year of his contract. That's an expensive deal that's almost off the books here. Now, PK Subban is a player who's really not been doing well the last few years. He's been on a pretty steady decline. Of course, he was a pretty dynamic, offensively gifted, really fast defenseman with the Montreal Canadiens. Brought his game to Nashville for a while, where he really rounded out his defensive game, in my opinion. Obviously, get himself a Norris Trophy in the way, and things have really been downhill since. Between the end of his time in Nashville to the first little while here in New Jersey, things have gone from bad to worse. PK Subban has lost a step, and he's just not quite the guy he used to be. Now, he'll likely could continue playing in the NHL beyond his contract. I'd have no doubt about that being a possibility, but he will be nowhere near a $9 million defenseman any longer. The New Jersey Devils could choose to retain up to 50% of the salary, and maybe another team would be willing to take him on for $4.5 million. That's a possibility. Now, it's not something they have to do because they don't have a need for that cap space. It's not like it's really making a major issue here in retaining other players. They could choose just to let him ride it out, stay with the team, and go off the books the following year. That's a real possibility. I'm not saying 100% here that PK Subban is gone. I just know it doesn't make sense to me for a rebuilding team with a young core to have a $9 million player on their books who's not really helping move the needle as far as production and performance goes. So should PK be there? Probably not, but at the same time, it's not worth spending a whole bunch of money or assets in order to make him go away. So really, at the end of the day here, if they trade him and retain 50% and they don't get much of anything back, so be it. He's gone. You pay him $4.5 million. The other team pays him $4.5 million, and that's it. I don't see them really considering a buyout. I mean, maybe, but it's not going to save them a ton of money, and they'd end up having some dead cap space next year, which really for them probably wouldn't be a big deal. They could choose to buy out or trade just for the roster spot, but no guarantees there. To me, it just doesn't make sense to have somebody making that much money based on where they're at with everything. The next player to me that you have to question the future on is forward Andreas Johnson, who they had acquired from the Toronto Maple Leafs the previous offseason. Johnson was, had some good years in Toronto, got himself a decent contract, making $3.4 million, in which he still has 2 years left on that deal. But last year, even though it was a unique season, was not good for him in New Jersey. Things just did not fit. He barely scored any goals. His point production was down big time. And it just, like I said, it just didn't seem like he gelled with the players he had an opportunity to play with. Now, the team may decide to keep him on for a couple of reasons here. One being the fact that it was a unique COVID-related season with a lot of things that are not normal, so maybe they'll give him another chance to redeem himself here. The contract is still not too bad at $3.4 million, but based on last year's performance, they could be selling really low and may not get much of anything in return. 26, 27 years old, so there's still plenty of opportunity for him to bounce back and kind of earn that contract more and maybe sell high at a later time, but you just have to think that they will consider moving him if the right deal comes along, because he just didn't seem to fit with the team, and I'm just not sure that really he was the right player for them to add to this young core of guys with guys like Hughes and Nico Hischier and Miles Wood and the other younger forwards on the team. He just didn't seem to fit in. Now, as I mentioned as well, looking at the contract, who is going to be the backup goalie for this team moving forward? Do they bring in more of a veteran, established player to work with and mentor and push Mackenzie Blackwood? I do think Mackenzie Blackwood is one of the better young goaltenders across the NHL and certainly has a bright future, and he'll only continue to get better, and his stats will get better as the team in front of him gets better. However, they could use some insulation there so he doesn't have to carry such a big workload for one, and for second, like if anything happens to him, that they have the confidence in the other guy who can pick up the workload. Like I said, they had that before when they had a veteran like Corey Schneider, even though his numbers were not the greatest the last while he was there. They don't have that anymore. They have no experience beyond Blackwood. Scott Wedgwood, even though he's in his later 20s, doesn't really have a whole lot of NHL experience, and even though I do think he'd be considered as an option, he might be better off being more like a number 3 3 goaltender for them instead of a number 2. So I do think there's a real possibility they will explore dipping into free agency. There's going to be a number of UFA goaltenders with a lot of experience that would be likely to take a 1-year deal. Now, of course, keep in mind, New Jersey did attempt to sign Corey Crawford. He was supposed to work with Blackwood and mentor him, and after coming to training camp decided to up and retire. So after leaving Chicago, I don't know if it was more of a medical issue, maybe he wasn't as healthy as he thought, but things didn't work out with Crawford, and that really left New Jersey in a pinch here. So obviously they could explore that kind of same route again and get somebody who's in a similar predicament that Crawford was just not that long ago. Of course, another big option for this team is the 2021 NHL Draft. Do they use both of those first-round picks, or do they take the Islander pick and trade it? I think their pick will definitely be used because it's guaranteed to be in the top 5. So like I said before, they can get themselves a top defenseman, whether it be Owen Power, Brant Clark, Luke Hughes. I think they probably are targeting Hughes if they're in that 3, 4, 5 range, because it makes sense that he would go there based on the draft rankings. And of course, his brother Jack is on the team, and I think that'd be a dynamic thing to add into the mix here. And I know the Devils would like to do that. I think the Canucks would be interested where they have Quinn Hughes, and although I don't think the Canucks are going to get that opportunity because I think they'll be 2 down on the draft board unless they get lucky in the lottery. However, either way, they can get themselves a solid player. I think if you take a look at the team, they have more in the way of younger forwards. They have Jack Hughes, they have Nico Hischier, they have their top 2 center icemen there, and they have some other interesting young forwards too, but the blue line is really lacking. Obviously, Ty Smith had himself a good rookie season this past year, but after a while kind of hit a wall, kind of slowed down, and he's only going to continue to get better as well. You have to wonder how long will they keep like Will Butcher? I know at one point he was really viewed as being a big part of the team's future, but I'm not completely sold on that being the case any longer. I think they could use another dynamic defenseman. Like I said, if it's not Luke Hughes, maybe it's Owen Power, maybe it's Brant Clark, maybe it's Simon Edvinsson. Either way, there's a lot more defensemen available at the higher end of this draft than there have been last year, and I think that's really the area they need to focus is their blue line. So we'll see what the Devils do. A lot of that's going to be based on where they slot based on the lottery, but defensemen should be top of their list if at all possible. And lastly here, we want to take a look at, can they bring in some veteran help? We've exemplified the fact here that they've got tons of salary cap space. There's no doubt about that. But they're also nowhere near a Stanley Cup or likely even competing for the playoffs. So attracting veteran help might be quite challenging. As I said earlier, they have some really young dynamic players to build around here, and they're going to continue to do that. But guys like Nico Hischier and Jack Hughes and Ty Smith, they need some help. They need some veterans to not only insulate them here a little bit, so they're not getting the toughest matchups every single night. That's part of it. But they also could use some mentors and some leaders. Now, I know Nico Hischier was made captain at a young age, and I have no doubt he'll grow into that role and become a good leader over time. Not to say that he's not a good leader now, but to have another older player who could kind of show him the way, so to speak. Not to say that there isn't other leaders on that team, but they need some veterans who can play and contribute. So to me, there's going to be a fair bit of interesting players on the open market that they could sign for fairly short term here that is not going to cost them a ton of money, that could come in, contribute for a year or two, help lead these guys a little bit, give them a little bit more depth so that they don't necessarily have to get the toughest matchups all the time, and then be able to move on here when they have more players coming in to expand in the role. Of course, they also have to be concerned about the expansion draft, but to be completely honest, New Jersey is not really in a predicament where they're bound to lose anything too significant. I mean, goaltending, they don't have to worry at all. They'll protect Blackwood, and anybody beyond that is not going to be a major loss. On the blue line, they don't really have a lot of defensemen there that they would absolutely insist on keeping anyways, and to protect 7 forwards outside of the couple younger ones that are exempt really isn't a big deal. So New Jersey's in a pretty good spot when it comes to Seattle expansion. They don't have to worry too much. They're going to lose a player, yes, but it's not going to be a significant piece. They don't need to be worried about making deals ahead of the expansion draft or anything of that nature, so they can kind of relax and head into the offseason, add some veteran help, continue to build with these kids, make sure you draft and develop well, and focus on that. So that, to me, is what you're going to expect from the Devils this offseason. I think we're still a few years away from seeing them really make some major leaps and bounds and being competitive to challenge for a playoff spot. That's a ways away, and we'll see here what you think. Let me know your comments down below, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all 32 NHL teams, all the news and rumors, as well as this offseason plan series. Stay tuned for the 28th place team coming up shortly. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.